Hello, and welcome to Short Stories, brought to you by the National Taichung University of Science and Technology Language Center. Today I will read an abridged version of H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds. Wells wrote this science fiction drama between 1895 and 1897, and it was first published in serial form in popular magazines in the UK and the US. The War of the Worlds is perhaps the most successful science fiction novel in history. Copies are still being published today, and it has been turned into dozens of radio programs, TV shows, and movies. Maybe some of you saw that Tom Cruise version. I think one of the reasons why it still remains popular is that it's actually a story about colonialism, which was still around when Wells wrote this story. It also plays on people's fears of foreign invasion and war. I like the story because the humans don't beat the aliens. Rather, humans are saved by dumb luck. This isn't a story about heroes overcoming a powerful enemy. This is a story about how small and helpless humans actually are. It's almost biblical. Vocabulary: complacently, complacently. The frog complacently sat in the pot of water, unaware that it was about to be boiled. Meteorite, meteorite. In 2021, a meteorite crashed through a Canadian woman's roof and landed on her bed. Cylinder, cylinder. The scuba divers strapped on their oxygen cylinders before diving. Tentacle, tentacle. The octopus grabbed a fish with its tentacles. Burn to a crisp, burn to a crisp. The people who could not escape the fire were burned to a crisp. Refugee, refugee. Millions of refugees fled Syria and went to Europe. Hightail it out of, hightail it out of. The sheriff is looking for us, so I think it's time we hightailed it out of here. Pandemonium, pandemonium. When the protesters and police started fighting each other, there was complete pandemonium in the streets. The story. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by beings of greater intelligence than man has ever known. People complacently went to and fro about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over the earth. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as sources of human danger. Yet across the gulf of space, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded this planet with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. One Wednesday night, a falling star was spotted over Winchester, England. Hundreds must have seen it and taken it for an ordinary falling star. It left a greenish streak behind it as it crossed the dark sky. My friend Ogilvy deduced that the meteorite had originated near Mars and had fallen nearby. He woke up early to go find it. When he arrived at the crash site, he found mounds of debris and heaps of scorched dirt. In the middle of the crater was the object, which appeared to be a metallic cylinder. Ogilvy was an expert in astronomy and meteorites especially, but this object greatly puzzled him. He had never seen or read anything like it before. Ogilvy received another surprise when he noticed that something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Out of the cylinder came wiggly gray tentacles. Then emerged a large mass with two huge eyes. It was an alien. The crowd that had gathered around the cylinder backed away. People screamed and murmured fearful questions to one another. Although the alien retreated back into the cylinder, no one except Ogilvy dared to approach the pit. The next day, all the newspapers ran headlines that said things like, "Martians arrive," or "Remarkable story in Winchester." I went to the pit myself to investigate and arrived at the same time as a regiment of soldiers. I asked Ogilvy what was happening. "They are going to send a peace delegation," he said. "This is so exciting," he added. Two soldiers approached the cylinder while waving a white flag. Suddenly, a flash of green light shot out of the cylinder, straight up into the blue sky. The approaching soldiers stopped dead in their tracks. I could see one of the Martians emerge from the pit, holding a strange object. There was another sudden flash of light from this object, and the soldiers appeared to burst into flames. "It's some kind of heat ray," I exclaimed to Ogilvy. The other soldiers turned and ran away as the alien kept firing his horrible weapon at them. The beam swept across the field, setting men and trees on fire. Ogilvy and I turned and ran as fast as we could. Sadly, Ogilvy was not fast enough. My dear friend was burned to a crisp. On Friday night, more falling stars were spotted. They landed in various locations across the globe, but quite a few landed in England. The military was rapidly mobilized, and soldiers could be seen everywhere. By Saturday, the fighting had begun. Out of the Martian cylinders arose enormous fighting machines, each standing taller than a 10-story building atop 3 spindly legs. Each of these killer tripods carried a heat ray weapon, which they fired indiscriminately at every human structure they saw. In addition to this weapon, the tripods also spewed toxic black smoke, which incapacitated every living thing it touched. I ran home and told my wife what I had seen. We grabbed what valuables we could, threw them into our wagon, and headed for London. My younger brother was in London when the Martians fell. He was a medical student preparing for his examination, and he heard nothing of the arrival until Saturday morning. The morning papers on Saturday contained, in addition to lengthy special articles on the planet Mars, a brief and vaguely worded telegram, all the more striking for its brevity. It said, "As formidable as the Martians seem, they have not yet left the pit into which they have fallen." This, as you know, was outdated information and would prove disastrous for the people of London. No one expected the arrival of the deadly tripods, and so people went about their usual routines as if danger wasn't approaching. My brother was at a train station when he noticed something was amiss. None of the trains from Winchester had arrived, much to the annoyance of people waiting on the platform. Then my brother saw dozens of heavily laden wagons in the streets. My brother asked someone who they were, and the man answered, "They're refugees from Winchester." Then the crowd started murmuring. People were becoming increasingly anxious as the news of what was happening slowly spread. At about 5 o'clock, a train finally arrived at the station, but not the one the passengers had expected. This train was loaded with soldiers and artillery pieces. It rattled right through the station without stopping. It was then that my brother decided it was time to hightail it out of London. When the dark figures of the tripods became visible, a roaring wave of fear swept through London. By Monday morning, the invaders were approaching southwestern London. The trickle of refugees turned into a torrent. Trains were overloaded, streets were clogged, and every cab in London was hired. People were pushing and trampling one another in their haste to save themselves. It was pandemonium. I met up with my brother at the River Thames. After a hug and a brief exchange of information, we made our way across the crowded bridge. To our horror, one of those terrifying machines emerged out of the smoke of the burning buildings. It was headed straight for the bridge. I held my wife's hand tight as we tried to squeeze our way through the panicky crowd. Fortunately, an artillery battery on the far side of the river kept the metal monster at bay. We crossed safely and continued on our journey to the coast. When we reached the dock, we could see the machine spewing huge curtains of poisonous black smoke in central London. This enormous dark cloud was highlighted by bursts of bright green light from their heat rays. Oh, what a terrible sight it was! People were desperate to get onto the boats. Some swam out to them, only to be pushed back and drowned. I don't know how, but we managed to secure a place on the last boat. As the boat left the dock, we could clearly see a tripod a few blocks away. It had one forward-facing window that looked like a big, glowing red eye. It stood on 3 thin legs that straddled the boulevard. Hanging from its body were metallic tentacles that writhed in the sunlight. One tentacle was armed with a heat ray, which the machine was aiming right at us. Fortunately for us, the Royal Navy had stationed the HMS Thunderchild in the harbor. It was the latest model of ironclad ship, equipped with state-of-the-art armor and weapons. It fired at the machine, stunning it. The eye of the machine turned away from us and toward Thunderchild. The ship fired 2 more times. We cheered when we saw the tripod collapse. "Take that!" I shouted. Unfortunately, our joy was short-lived. A second tripod appeared walking down the Thames. Its legs were so long that it could easily wade across the deepest part of the river. The Thunderchild turned its cannons on this monster too, but the Martians were faster and fired their weapons first. The ship's powder supply was ignited, and the ship blew apart in the water. I clutched my wife in my arms, fearing that we would be next. But by then, we were already out in the open water. We were out of range. We steamed toward continental Europe, not knowing what would await us there. We looked back on our poor, beleaguered country. We could see a half-dozen monstrous machines skulking around the burning city. "My God," I mumbled, "this is the end of humanity." To be continued. Questions. Number 1. Where did the first aliens land? A. England. B. Scotland. C. Ireland. D. France. The answer is A. England. Question 2. What was in the metal cylinder? A. Gunpowder. B. Explosives. C. Martians. D. Nothing. The answer is C. Martians. Question 3. How did the narrator's brother learn that the aliens were attacking? A. He read about it in the newspaper. B. He heard it on the radio. C. He watched the evening news on TV. D. He noticed unusual things were happening. The answer is D. He noticed unusual things were happening. Question 4. How did the narrator and his family escape the aliens? A. They took a train. B. They bought the last plane tickets. C. They took a ship. D. They swam to France. The answer is C. They took a ship.